So some of the critiques then, even that I make of the original when it's a standalone video, without knowing what the goal is behind it, some of the critiques start to fall apart, because if it's pre-evangelism, it's just getting the name of Jesus out there. Now, we can argue whether or not that's actually necessary or something that we ought to be doing. Okay, but that's their goal. That's what they want to do. Hello and welcome to FreeThinking Ministries. I am your host, Josh Klein. It is good to be with you today. You know me from FT Monthly, but I'll be popping on from time to time to tackle other cultural topics of the day. And today's cultural topic we are going to be talking about, I'm a little bit behind on this, but those who watched the Super Bowl saw a Super Bowl ad called He Gets Us. And there have been a lot of takes on this Super Bowl ad. I've had some of them on X or Twitter. I've seen other people. I've seen a lot of big name conservative and liberal outlets talk about this. Some people upset on the left side of the aisle because the funders of the campaign are people from Hobby Lobby who are supposedly anti-LGBTQ. And so it's like a Trojan horse commercial. And then some people on the right who are upset with it because it obfuscates the gospel message. So I kind of waded through some of these. I'm not a hot take person necessarily. Sometimes I am, but sometimes I'm not. So sometimes I'm way behind the fray when it comes to this, because I want to get kind of to the bottom and kind of sort through some of the things that are going on. And so I'm a little bit late to the party, but I hope to do a little bit of a deeper dive today than we would normally do. Sometimes we just do a 1-minute snippet. I saw a guy on Instagram do kind of a 1-minute snippet of saying, oh, this is supposed to lead people to Christ. And then he did some searches on their website for righteousness, holiness, and something else, and was like, oh, look, they're not even leading people to Christ. They're talking about righteousness or holiness. And I, as many views as that would get, I actually don't think that's a helpful response because of the goal of He Gets Us. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a look at the commercial. I know you've seen it probably 6,000 times, but I do want to play it. And then as I play it, I'm going to critique the commercial itself as itself, just completely zero in on it, not with any other context of what He Gets Us is trying to do, because most people have been doing that and are going to do this. So we're going to look at the commercial itself and see what it's saying, and then we're going to zoom out and we're going to ask, is the commercial, first of all, accomplishing what He Gets Us wanted it to? In some instances it is. And second, is it helping He Gets Us actually further the conversation of Jesus Christ and what they want to talk about? So we're going to take a look at the commercial, and we're going to take a look at some other things too. So lots of clunkiness in screen sharing here. So this is the commercial. It's the foot washing commercial, if you haven't seen it. And I will kind of narrate along for those who haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, you've been living under a rock. But here you go. It's 1 minute. So you go. A young man washed his father's feet. Police officer washing an African-American guy's feet. A popular girl washing an outcast's feet, I think. You've got a person on an Indian reservation and a trucker washing his feet. Person at a family planning abortion clinic, pro-life person, alcoholic with a mother or sister or someone, climate activist and a oil rigger, an illegal alien and some suburban mom, another suburban mom, and an immigrant, seems like a Muslim immigrant. Two different activists, one saying let them speak, one saying shut them up. African-American man, there you go. And then finally the priest with the either homosexual or transgender, I don't know what's going on. Just didn't teach hate. Washed feet. Okay. So that is the commercial, and I want to talk about the commercial itself because I think most people are going to see the standalone commercial and are not going to think of the context of what He Gets Us is trying to do. In fact, we'll take a look at an article in a little bit with it. He Gets Us released with this commercial to explain their thought process here. But people are going to look at this as standalone. They're not going to remember last year's commercial necessarily. They're going to look at this as standalone. That's what everyone's done. They've looked at this as standalone. So my primary issue with this commercial. I got a few issues, but my primary issue with this commercial. Well, first I want to talk about actually some things that I like about the commercial. How about that? I like the aesthetics. I think the pictures are compelling. I think the music is fantastic. It's really well produced and put together. I think the desire to show people the type of love that Christ would show people who are in sin is admirable. I think it actually misses the mark in showing that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's some other things about the commercial that I don't like too much. And one of them is actually towards the end where it says, Jesus didn't teach hate. Now, this is not me saying Jesus taught hate. I totally agree. Jesus did not teach hate. But the problem with this commercial, really, as it stands, is that this idea that Jesus didn't teach hate allows the person who is watching it to define the word hate for themselves. And our culture, our post-Christian culture, post-Christian context, has decided to define the word hate as non-affirmation. So when they say Jesus didn't teach hate, what they're saying is Jesus is the affirming type of person, and that all of these foot washings are affirming. That's not what he gets us is trying to say, I don't think. But I think that's what people see in the story. And I think this is also why some people on the liberal or left side of the aisle don't like the commercial either, because they feel like it's a Trojan horse. It's saying one thing while meaning something completely different. And I disagree with that. I think he gets us as totally trying to say, hey, even though people don't believe the same as we do, we should serve them, we should care for them, we should love them, because that's what Jesus would do. That doesn't mean we should affirm them in their sin. I think that's what he gets us as trying to do. But I think they missed the mark because I said Jesus didn't teach hate. So yeah, I agree, Jesus didn't teach hate. One of the things, and we'll take a look at a clip in a little bit, but one of the things that they're saying is that people have a misunderstanding of who Jesus is. And I agree. I agree that that's true. There's a study, and I'll link it in the description, that says that 71% of people that aren't Christians have a favorable view of Jesus, but an unfavorable view of the church. And so I think they see that and they go, well, we need to rectify this. The church has done something wrong, and the church has done a lot of things wrong. I'm not saying the church hasn't done some things wrong, but partner that statistic together with the statistic of, I think there's a group a couple of years ago that released a statistic that said 60% of self-professing evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 40 believe that Jesus is not the only way to salvation. Well, that just goes hand in hand with misunderstanding who Jesus is. And so in a world that talks a lot about Jesus, in a post-Christian culture, we talk a lot about Jesus. Jesus's name is not new to people. And that's why they can call the campaign "He Gets Us," because they know exactly who he is. People know. But the problem is this commercial actually allows people to enter in their assumptions about Jesus into the commercial. And it doesn't help too much. I'm going to share an article that actually points this out a little bit from He Gets Us itself about the commercial. And we'll share that here. So the article, they've got the He Gets Us commercial there. So they start by saying, as we thought about what to do for this year's commercial, we reflect on our 2023 TV spot, Love Your Enemies. So that's what they're saying there. That commercial was all about hate and division. Okay, so you can see that they're trying to build off of something. So first thing I'll say, as we zoom back out in the context of just the commercial, is He Gets Us seems to have a plan for where they're going in the future. So that's important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it says, ultimately, it was about pride, last year's commercial. Pride says, I am right and you are wrong. That's a very simplistic view of pride. It's very simplistic because sometimes a person is right and another person is wrong, and it's not arrogant or prideful to say so. It's actually helpful, and it's actually humbling. Jesus does this, right? With Nicodemus. He's teaching Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is supposed to be a teacher. He's supposed to be a Pharisee and a teacher, and he teaches him, and he says, you're the teacher? How do you not know these things? He's correcting the common thoughts of the day. So pride, Jesus is not arrogant or prideful in that moment. He's actually humbly correcting Nicodemus, and sometimes he does it in a very, very upfront and in your face sort of way, calling people brood of vipers, going and flipping tables and saying, my house should be a house of prayer. So pride isn't only saying, I am right and you are wrong. Pride resists correction. Pride does look inward to myself to define maybe what is right and what is wrong. But pride is not only about saying I am right and you are wrong, because sometimes a person is right and another person is wrong. So pride is more about not admitting you're wrong when you are wrong than it is about knowing that you're right and telling someone that they are wrong. If a kid on a math test says 2 + 2 = 5, it is not prideful for the teacher to correct them, to say, no, 2 + 2 is 4. And this is why 2 + 2 is 4. You are right, you are wrong, and I am right. So right at the outset, I don't like the way they're setting this up. They're setting up last year's commercial. That's not to say pride isn't an issue. Pride is definitely an issue. It's definitely an issue in the church. It's definitely an issue in a lot of places. But it's to say that if it's just I'm right and you're wrong, that's not pride. That's not pride. So this is a very postmodern way of thinking about pride. It's saying that, and I don't think he gets us just really trying to say that they're trying to reach people. So I want to be gracious here and charitable, but accidentally maybe what they're playing into is a postmodern thought of relative truth, of saying pride says I'm right and you're wrong because you get to define what's true and what's not true. That's how people will read that. Whether or not that's what they intend, that's how people will read that in this day and age. So moving on. So that's about last year's commercial. So already when we're talking about the plan they have going forward, if that's what they're saying about last year's commercial, I have concerns about this year's commercial. So they said, we thought maybe this year we should focus on the thematic inverse of last year's commercial, one built on the premise of love and unity. Awesome. Love that. And with an upcoming election year that will be filled with division and derision, we decided to focus on one of the most important directives given by Jesus: love your neighbor. Now, I'm going to pause here because this is an interesting statement. Because as we watch the commercial, it's all about foot washing. The foot washing is not a love your neighbor statement that Jesus is making. That's all of the law and the prophets boiled down to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love God first, and then you know how to love your neighbor as yourself. So the foot washing, and then Jesus depicts that through the Good Samaritan, right? And so the foot washing is actually not really a love your neighbor statement. It's learn how to serve each other as disciples as you build the movement of Christ Church. That's what the foot washing is about. So we'll get into a little bit more, but love your neighbor and then conflating that with the foot washing. Foot washing might be about loving your neighbor, but that's not all that foot washing is about, and that's important. So actually, if they wanted to go to love your neighbor, focus on a Good Samaritan narrative in a 1-minute commercial would have been really, really good. Would have been really, really good, but they didn't go that way. So it says Jesus was using foot washing to emphasize a larger point, a symbol for all his followers to see how they should treat one another. I think this is exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. A symbol for all his followers to see how they should treat one another, not jockeying for position of who is greatest in the kingdom and who is least, but seeking to be the least in the kingdom to serve one another for the greater good of glorifying God. I love that. But does the commercial actually do that? So they go on. As we explored creative ideas, we recalled the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet and realized this was the perfect example of how we should treat one another, even those people with whom we don't see eye to eye. Jesus had washed Peter's feet, a loyal friend who would publicly deny that he knew Jesus later that very night. And even more astoundingly, Jesus washed Judas Iscariot's feet, the one who would betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Now, these things are true, but the fact of the matter is, both of them receive penalties for their disobedience. Peter is restored. Judas ends up hanging himself. Jesus washing Judas's feet is about Judas declaring that he's a disciple of Jesus, and Jesus saying, if you're really my disciple, this is how you will respond. This is what you will do for one another. And then Judas actually does the exact opposite that night of what Jesus is trying to exemplify. He goes and sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Now, Jesus knew he was going to betray him, and Jesus still washes his feet, but he does so because Judas claims that he's a disciple. So he's saying, I'm going to wash all of your feet, even those who might betray me. Okay, so it's still Jesus' friends and foes, yes, but still in the context of this discipleship context of how to build the church when Jesus ascends. So then they get into some background on foot washing. They actually do a really good job here. Again, these aesthetics, the pictures are really nice. Here's a good quote. Foot washing required humility on both parties. We see that with Peter, right? Peter says, hey, if don't wash my feet. And Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you'll have no part in me. And then Peter says, well, then wash all of me. And here's an interesting statement. When Jesus says, hey, when you are already clean, when your body's already been washed, only your feet need to be washed. When your body's already been washed, only your feet need to be washed. Why would Jesus say that? Well, Jesus would say that because it's not just about different ideologies. It's about people who call themselves disciples caring for one another in a way that will show people the unity of the church for the building up and the edification of saints and the glorification of God. That's what it's about. So we keep scrolling down here, and this is where things go a little bit off the rails with the commercial and with what he gets us is trying to portray here, because it says, we began to imagine a world where ideological others were willing to set their differences aside and wash one another's feet. How would that look? How would our contentious world change if we washed one another's feet? Not literally, but figuratively. So is foot washing about setting your ideological differences aside? No, it's not. It's about recognizing that we are unified in the body of Christ and we're supposed to serve each other, not jockey for a position of who is greatest and who is least. And he gets us, to their credit, talks about this in this article. They do say that. But then they make the leap. The next leap is we're going to set our ideological differences aside and wash each other's feet. Again, this is a great example of loving your neighbor. It's a great example of maybe the Good Samaritan. I don't think this is a great example of washing feet, because washing feet assumes discipleship. So I saw someone else saying that, well, how do you know that people in this video, how do we know whether they're discipleship or whether they're Christians or not Christians? And I get that, but reading the article, we see that that's not even on the radar of he gets us. They're talking about setting the ideological differences aside, and if that's the case, that means we are washing the feet of people who are hostile to Christ. And some could say, well, Judas was hostile to Christ. Yes, but he was claiming fealty to Christ. And Jesus was saying, if you're going to claim that, this is what I'm calling you to do. And then Judas moves forward with his hostility. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. So then they get into figurative foot washing. They say figurative foot washing can be as simple as giving a compliment to a coworker or paying for a stranger's lunch. But is that the same as foot washing? That symbol's a little bit different. That can be generosity. That maybe that's loving your neighbor. But I think the symbolism is actually a little bit different. So this is what I'm saying is I think it obfuscates what's actually going on with the foot washing. It's great imagery, but I think it doesn't actually exegete the passage of the foot washing correctly. And that's part of the problem that people have with it. But the greater issue here is, I'll stop sharing the screen now, but the greater issue here is possibly maybe we're willing to forgive all of that if he gets us as accomplishing the goal of furthering the conversation. And I'll say two things about that. One, they are accomplishing their goal because so many people are talking about the commercial. They're accomplishing their goal. So many people are Googling Jesus. Did he really hate it? So that part of their goal they're accomplishing. And so I want to look at a clip real quick of Ed Stetzer explaining, and Ed Stetzer is involved with He Gets Us, but he's not like in charge or anything, but explaining what He Gets Us is trying to accomplish when with these commercials and what their goal is, and then we can analyze whether or not we think this commercial actually reaches their goal. So I think this is important. Sean McDowell is interviewing Ed Stetzer about the He Gets Us campaign. This is prior to the 2024 Super Bowl, so it's really recent. And Ed is going to answer a couple questions. I wanted to answer the first one real quickly because it's not necessarily about the ad, but it's about some other criticisms that I've seen of the He Gets Us campaign as a whole. But let's take a look.
Not a bastion of righteousness.
So how do we? I just justify, or not justify, explain the thinking behind so much money for a 30-second ad.
Totally. Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
It is probably the most common objection, particularly from maybe secular people. Not that you're secular, Sean, but the reason is like,
I work for you.
Yeah, so. Fair enough. Fair enough. I would say that for me, I know some of the folks behind it. I don't know everybody, but I know some folks behind it, and they had a burden that Christianity really has been misrepresented in culture. And one of the ways that they would like to foster a better understanding of the Christian faith is to point to who Jesus was and what he did. So again, it's sort of like what was the burden on their heart, but of course the challenge is, there's not a thing that you do that someone might say you should have done it this way or differently. But I'm not, and I don't think they're bothered by that. That's just something that they had the resources to do, and they felt the call to do. And it actually, there's actually news stories that sort of talk about where, they said, how did the Christian message get so misunderstood? And how do we help people understand who Jesus is? So again, back to that frame, who Jesus is, what he does, what he's done, how to understand him more. That's what they wanted to focus on.
Okay,
so this is important. Two things. One is I've seen a lot of even conservative Christians make this statement about the amount of money it takes to spend on a Super Bowl commercial. I'm not necessarily offended by that. I'm not necessarily offended by somebody spending a lot of money to create a Super Bowl commercial if they think it will further the narrative and be able to help with the conversation about who Jesus is. So spend all the money you want. How much is a soul worth, right? So spending all this money, and then also some of that criticism comes from the idea that, well, if they're spending all this money doing the Super Bowl ad, that's money they could have been doing to feed the homeless and do some other things. And that's assuming that these people who are clearly very, very affluent don't already do those things in some degree. They probably do already do some of those things in some degree. So the amount of money is not as huge of an issue to me as it is to some people. So all of that said, if that's the case, let's keep going, because they're going to get into what the real goal of the He Gets Us campaign is all about. So let's look at that.
Let me push back.
Please, no, my feelings
again, because I know they're not. Some people say, okay, if we're focusing on who he is and what he did, He Gets Us might get us to empathy, the incarnation, but not the death and the resurrection, which is the root of the message itself. So it's not really focused ultimately on what he did. I've heard that pushback. So give us some context.
So again, this is more pre-evangelism. We're going to keep coming back to that. Evangelism would be proclaiming Jesus' death on the cross for our sin and in our place, and calling women and men to respond by grace and through faith to the good news of that gospel. And the guy who's leading the campaign is a committed follower of Jesus. But there's a team that actually speaks into this that helps to avoid some Christian jargon and things of that sort. So
that makes sense.
You would be, if you're like, this is not either of you, but if you been going to church for 30 years, you love Jesus with your whole heart, these ads are not targeted towards you. So you may feel that because you're not the audience. Now, the question is the audience being moved? And I think that's right now. We're kind of thinking through, got some new leadership. I'm not the new leadership. We got some new leadership. We're saying, are we moving the needle the way that we want to? So that's those.
Okay. So I really appreciate, the way Ed puts that. He says pre-evangelism. So some of the critiques then, even that I make of the original, when it's a standalone video, without knowing what the goal is behind it, some of the critiques start to fall apart, because if it's pre-evangelism, it's just getting the name of Jesus out there. Now, we can argue whether or not that's actually necessary or something that we ought to be doing. Okay, but that's their goal. That's what they want to do. And I'm not going to argue that their goal is necessarily wrong here, but I'm going to say that if that's their goal, then we should start to reanalyze their commercials in that way. And some of the criticisms still hold up, but some of the criticisms of, well, you don't mention holiness or righteousness or these sorts of things on your website. Well, all that's true, but it's for a very specific reason. And Ed points it out here. He says we've got a team basically taking some of that theological language out, not because the language isn't important, but because we want it to be accessible to people who are asking questions because of the commercials, and not being all of a sudden lambasted with all these terms that they now need to understand. So they now need to understand the definitions for. So I can appreciate that. In fact, one of the things that I did in preparation for this is I went through a lot of the articles and a lot of the things on He Gets Us website to see, are they actually trying to move the needle like they say that they are? Because that's one of the things Ed says at the end of that clip that we just watched. He says, we have to analyze whether or not we're moving the needle the way we want. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that because it is then a self-scout. It's to look in and say, okay, did this commercial actually do what we wanted it to do? Are we getting hits? Are people actually coming to Christ or asking questions about Christ? I don't know how they filter all of those questions or how they do that. He says later in the interview that they don't really have a great mechanism for reporting or for getting information from people who go to the website. So all of that to say that if that's their goal, if their goal is pre-evangelism, just getting the name of Christ out there, they're accomplishing that to a certain degree. One of the problems I see with it, though, is that I think it's this idea that as long as we get Jesus' name out there, then that's good enough. That'll get people in the door. And the problem is people then are able to watch that commercial and come up with what Jesus ought to look like based on that commercial. Now you've got some heavy lifting to do on the back end if you're going to move people from what they think Jesus should be to who Jesus actually is. And I will say this, in credit to He Gets Us, I looked through a lot of their things. They have some Bible reading plans, and they gently but firmly try to move people from this affirmation style Jesus to this Jesus that changes. I looked through some of their devotional plans, and one of them starts with Jesus understanding you. He knows who you are. He loves you. And then about, I think it's 5 or 6 days in, they shift from that method to talking about Zacchaeus, and well, Jesus changed his life and Zacchaeus gave all this money back, which would really hit people the right way in our culture because we're so concerned about money and ethics with money and that sort of thing. So they do that well. And then about 2 lessons later, they do bring up the word sin, and they talk about Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross. So all of that to say, He Gets Us is, I think, in good faith, trying to move people from not just skeptic, but uninterested, maybe into the realm of skeptic, asking questions, saying, is this Jesus person really real? Into the gospel-focused, you're a sinner in need of salvation. I think they're really trying to do that. I as I peruse their website, were there things that I would change if I were consulted? Absolutely, but I've not been consulted, and I don't anticipate they'll even watch this. But that being said, I do think their motives are to get people there. So there are some people that say their motives aren't that their motives are. I've seen some people say that it's a Marxist organization. It's not a Marxist organization. I do think, though, they're playing into cultural narratives a little bit too much to get attention, and that is where I think we're starting to rob the Holy Spirit of some of the work that the Holy Spirit is trying to do in relation to the gospel, because what we're trying to do is package Jesus in a certain way so that He'll be attractive, not just offer people Jesus. And that's kind of the fundamental difference. And it could be that we just have a difference of opinion on that fundamental exercise of saying, sometimes the gospel is going to offend people, and we have to be okay with that. To where they're saying, well, we don't want to outright offend people. We want to invite people. And if they get offended along the way, we want to start with love and grace first. I totally get that. And totally understand it. So with all of that background in mind, I'll say the question then needs to be, does the commercial further He Gets Us's goal of this pre-evangelism? So I think it a little bit does and a little bit doesn't. It does in the fact that it's getting people to talk about, it's getting people to go to their website. if they follow along some of their Bible reading plans, it'll get them to start to realize what the real gospel is. But also it doesn't, because it's packaged in a way where the commercial, whether they realized it or not, was going to be perceived as political. They put out some political imagery, especially with climate activists and oil rigger, and you've got the immigrant bus and the suburban mom, and this assumption that all of the people doing the foot washing are the Christians, and they would otherwise be ostracizing these people if they weren't washing their feet. So the hard thing is, how do you fit all of that other stuff into the commercial? And I'm not sure how you fix all of that. But I do think that as you analyze the commercial, I don't think it actually gets people to where you want them to go, because it can let people settle in the, yeah, okay, I'm good with Jesus, and not go further. That's kind of my critique. We're not good with Jesus, not until we recognize our need for him, we recognize our sin, our sinful desires and passions need to be changed. So this brings us to a competing ad that was released on Twitter as well. And I'm going to look at this one, and I'm going to critique it as well, because why not? Why not critique it as well? So we will share this screen. Hold on just a second. Okay. Riveting television here. Got to get to it. Okay. So here we go. This is the competing Super Bowl ad that somebody released. And let's take a look at this.
Don't ask me.
So what this ad is going to focus on is the former part of it, the Jesus changing, that sanctification, the changing power of the gospel. They use the same music. Okay, so Jesus doesn't just get us, he saves us. Forgives us, heals us, delivers us, redeems us, loves us. So that is a powerful commercial. So those are powerful. Yeah, it's powerful. Very well done. Loved it. So that commercial focuses on the change that the gospel does, the focus on former all of these things. So I agree. I like that commercial better. And part of the reason I like that commercial better is because I'm a Christian. Is because I've seen the gospel transform and change lives, and I want people to know that can happen. So the difference between these two commercials is this: the difference is that the He Gets Us commercial is trying to reach the people who don't think they need to be changed. And I think that's an important key, whether or not you like the commercial, to understand that the reason they didn't come out with this former one, whether or not it was talked about or not, the reason they didn't is because the idea is, well, I don't need to be changed. Jesus loves me just the way I am. And say, yes, he loves you. He gets you. He understands your struggles and things like that. He doesn't hate you. He loves you. He wants to invite you in to his family. Let us help you learn what that looks like. That's what the He Gets Us ad is about. This other competing ad that I just played is not about that. It's about meeting the seeker and saying, hey, if you are disenfranchised, if you have been experimenting with all these other ways of life and you have found limited to no hope, no fulfillment, Jesus can change you. If you think you can't be changed, the power of the gospel is salvation for all who believe. You can be changed and find fulfillment in this life like these other people. That's a very different message. So when we read the article says, well, they wanted to focus on loving your neighbor. this other commercial doesn't necessarily do that. This other commercial focuses on the transformative work and power of the gospel, which is great, and I love it. I love it. I would love to see it actually air. It's fantastic because I think it serves a competing purpose, but it is a different purpose. So while I kind of like it better because I understand the transformative power of the gospel, I also understand that He Gets Us wasn't trying to reach that same group. And so to say, well, this is a better commercial for what He Gets Us wanted to do, I think is actually a little bit off. I would have liked to see He Gets Us lean into the Good Samaritan angle rather than the foot washing angle, because that does a better job of understanding what it means to love your neighbor rather than just the foot washing. So that's my critique. But I do love that competing commercial. There's one other competing commercial that I want to look at as well. You may have seen this one, you may have not. And this is where satire can sometimes be funny but not helpful. So here we go. Gay couple. This is a morbidly obese man that's got gluttony problems, drug addict, alcoholic. And then at the end, it says he wants to be with you in eternity forever. And Satan. Okay. So that's it. That's it. All right. So, excuse me. So is that a helpful commercial, right? Is that helpful? This is I think the problem with the response to the He Gets Us commercial. While that one is funny, I really don't think He Gets Us was trying to say that we should affirm people in their sin. I think they're trying to say we should serve and care for people despite where they are on the socioeconomic status or where they are with God. We should care for them. We should serve them. We should put ourselves below them. All of that, and to say that's what Jesus did. But you can see though how understanding how people might internalize that with the Jesus didn't teach hate, to say, yeah, He would affirm me. That's what the Babylon Bee is saying here is in a satirical way saying, maybe you don't understand that we live in a post-Christian culture, and when people see this commercial, they're not going to say, oh yeah, Jesus is there for me, I should figure out more. They're going to say, yeah, exactly, Jesus actually affirms the way I live my life and what I do. And so, well, I think it's kind of a funny commercial. It's a funny take. I don't think it's actually what He Gets Us was trying to do. So in the end, what as Christians do we make of the He Gets Us commercial? I don't really, it's funny because I make a 40-minute video on this and I don't really care one way or the other, but I do think that we do need to be honest and not just reactionary in our responses. We need to analyze them and say, I don't know that He Gets Us is actually getting the point that, or actually getting across the point that they're trying to get across, and call them to something greater. But also to say, we can be active in the culture and society as well, telling people that the power of the gospel can transform their lives. Because it can, and it will. And it's not just hell insurance. It's about being invited into the family of God. And so if I had one critique of the response, it's that it's this angry response rather than a caring response to say, I don't think you're actually getting what you want to get. Now, to He Gets Us his credit, if you peruse their website like I did, well, there's one problem is that it's not obvious. Like you can sift through all the articles and it starts to feel kind of like an activist page. But if you go through their Bible studies, if people actually end up there, they are going to be presented with the gospel. They are going to be presented with the gospel. But the question is, does this commercial actually get people to go there? I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that it does. Maybe it does. Maybe they'll come out and say, actually, these are the hits that we've gotten. These are the people that have reached out and said their lives have been changed. If that's the case, then I celebrate that the gospel has been preached in this way and people are coming to saving faith in Jesus Christ. Just because I think that the message is obfuscating a little bit and it's confusing and sometimes playing into a cultural narrative that it doesn't need to play into to get its point across. Just because I think that doesn't mean that I won't celebrate the changing lives and the fact that people are coming to faith in Jesus Christ because of it. I hope they do. I hope that I am wrong, and I hope that as that campaign continues to go forward, they are able to reach people for the gospel. And this is the last thing I'll say about this, and then we'll hang up and listen, right? This is the last thing I'll say. He clearly has a long-term plan. So before I get too upset or up in my feels about what's going on, I think it's important to recognize that they have a plan going forward, and perhaps we're going to see some of the things that I talked about earlier be actualized in that plan as we go forward. I hope we do, and I hope people come to Jesus because of it. All right, if you like this video, please like it, please share it, please subscribe to our channel. We are over 5,500 subscribers. We would love to get to 600 soon. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit that little notification bell as well. And let us know what you think in the comments. What do you think of the commentary that I'm making on the article and on the commercial? What are your thoughts on the He Gets Us campaign as a whole? We would love to have that dialogue. And as always, as we say here at Free Thinking Ministries, God bless and stay reasonable.